Good morning, everyone. Thank you for coming and joining us today for our joint NECC and Nujabo coffee break celebrating Women's History Month. We have two great speakers this morning, and we are looking forward to hearing from them. So the agenda will be, we will hear from Jane Eliasof from the Montclair History Center, and then Dr. Tendai Ndoro from, following that for more contemporary, forward-thinking perspective, and we'll have questions and answers discussion following. A couple of reminders. Please mute yourself during the presentations. If you would like to see the person presenting, switch to presenter view. And during the presentations, feel free to put any questions in the chat so that we can follow up with them during the question and answer period. I think that's everything. That's the other thing is remembering all the reminders on virtual events. So let's get started. And I'd like to introduce our first speaker. Jane Elizoff is the Executive Director of the Montclair History Center, an independent not-for-profit organization dedicated to preserving local history, educating the community about it and its importance, and sharing the stories of the people who have shaped Montclair. In her 10 years as Executive Director, Jane has expanded the stories the Montclair History Center tells to reflect the rich diversity of Montclair and to be relevant to the community. She's also responsible for bringing a microform to the History Center that has added new vitality and increased visitation. She led the rebranding of the organization in 2017 to the Montclair Historical Society and is currently writing a book on rebranding history organizations that will be published by Rowan and Littlefield later this year. Prior to her work at the Montclair History Center, she spent more than 25 years designing and writing marketing, educational, and training programs for the healthcare industry. And now, without further ado, Jane.
Thank you. Thank you both for inviting me here today. I always enjoy meeting with other women in the community, so I really appreciate this. I think Nina reached out to me and asked me if I'd be willing to talk about some of the historical women who helped women. And particularly, she was thinking of the YWCA story that we've begun to tell at the Montclair History Center. And I'm going to start with that, and then I'm going to sort of segue into a couple of other women. The list that you see behind me, I don't know if you can read it. It's pretty small, but it is some of the women that are from Montclair that I irreverently used as my first history at home program called Badass Women of Montclair. And it came to be because there were just a lot of women that I kept running across that had broken really incredible barriers and had done some pretty cool things. And so I put together this presentation, one of which you can find on our YouTube channel. The other one was the one I forgot to even record, our very first one. But I'd like to start out with the story of the why and then talk to you about two of the women who were influential in that. I'm going to pause for a minute because I'd love to open it up for questions. And if you would like, I can continue on with some of the other women on there, including one of my favorite number twos, Emily Blackwell. So let me start with the why. The YWCA movement started back in the 1880s when women were going off to college for the first time. And their families wanted to ensure that they were going to be safe and be imbued with the right Christian values while they were away. And so they created the YWCAs for women so that these girls who were going away would not, be tempted to any kind of sin or anything else that might happen. So started in the colleges, but pretty soon Black women recognized the value of the YWCAs. Particularly, many of them now were beginning to move away from their homes as part of the Great Migration, moving north. And you couldn't just come up and stay at a hotel and get an apartment the way you would today. You needed someplace that was safe to stay. And safety was You either went in with a family member, you went in with a friend, or you went to a YWCA. And so the YWCAs sort of began this whole movement, but the way it always was structured was that a white YWCA would see a need for a Black YWCA in town for whatever reason, and that's a whole different presentation. And then if that were the case, they would open up a YWCA and it would almost become a sister branch of the white YWCA. And about 50 of these popped up throughout the United States. But that leads me to my first woman, and that's Alice Huey Foster. And Alice was one of the families that was part of one of the families that was the earliest to migrate up north back in the 1880s. And her family came up and settled in Montclair. She was also the first African-American to graduate from Montclair High School, which is kind of cool. And she went off to college, and when she returned, she settled in Montclair, and she and her sisters actually bought a building, a storefront on Bloomfield Avenue that's today Fume. And they rented out the upper spaces for businesses. So it was a source of income for them, which I think is really kind of cool. But in 1912, Alice recognizes that there's a need for women in Montclair. And so she and a group of other women got together and started up a YWCA in a rented house on Forest Street. It grew so quickly that within 8 years, they had 500 or 600 members, and they needed to find some way to accommodate this growing membership. Well, the Crane House came up for sale. Now, for those of you who, is everybody familiar with the Crane House before I go into that depth? Okay, the Crane House was built in 1796 by Israel Crane, who was a prominent mover and shaker in Montclair. He did enslave people. We know of at least two, Joe and Dinah, who he had enslaved. But then supposedly he came around, and by 1820s, 1830s, he became more of a progressive, I'll say abolitionist, but that may be going too far. I would say he was no longer in favor of slavery. Let's put it that way. Nonetheless, his house was a very large house for the time and for Montclair. And so and it was built right across from Lackawanna Station, where the Geyer YMCA is now. So Israel Crane's house was coming up for sale, and they purchased it, and it became a YWCA for 45 years until they realized they needed a more Y-like space with gyms and things like that. And it was ultimately moved over to Orange Road, where it is now, and is part of the Montclair History Center's properties. So they purchased the YWCA, and it became, over the span of the next century, really, first of all, a safe space early on, when African-American women could not go to any place they wanted to go in town. There, because of de facto segregation, it became a place where they really were inculcated with the value of education. So many of these women that I've spoken to are part of the Y, not only went off and got undergraduate degrees, but often multiple advanced degrees. And I think back to my own mother, who was the daughter of an Italian immigrant, who was not allowed to go to college because that money was reserved for her brothers. And so to have so many of these women with those kind of pedigrees after their names is just incredible, considering you're talking about 1920s, 1930s, 1940s. The YWCA was also an amazing place for instilling pride in their heritage. Remember, this is long before Black History Month was ever even a dream in anybody's mind. And they had people like Langston Hughes, W.E.B. Du Bois, Mary McLeod Bethune come and speak to people there. It was a place where they could learn leadership skills, because if they were in the school club, they would probably not be allowed to hold a leadership position. It was a place where they could just chill and hang out and do homework after school. So it became a really remarkable place and a social center for the African-American community in town for many years. And so to me, that is Alice really helping women, right? A woman helping a woman. And that brings me to my second person, and that's Hortense Ridley Tate. When they bought the YWCA in 1920, or when they bought the Crane House in 1920, they hired a young woman, 21 years old, from Topeka, Kansas, Hortense Ridley. to come out and be the Girl Reserve secretary. The Girl Reserves was a club that they had. And they hired Hortense to come out and be the Girl Reserve secretary and also sort of a house mom, because now they were taking in boarders as well. So she comes out and I remember her saying in one clip that I saw that she came out of the train station and she looked across the street and there's this beautiful mansion across the street. And she was so excited because she knew that this was going to be her home for a couple of years. And so she really became a guiding light, even though she did not stay as a Girl Reserve secretary for many years. She became a guiding light for the YWCA. And the women that were there. I've spoken. She actually lived to 104 years old. And so a lot of people are still around today who knew Hortense. And I'm telling you, when I cross over to that other side, she's going to be one of the first people I want to sit down and chat with, because she just seemed like a really lovely person. People will tell about how she taught them about how to find joy in life, about how to dream and aspire. She taught them about, one of my favorites, she taught us how to be ladies, and just a remarkable woman. And as I said, a guiding light for many women, a mentor to many, many women over the course of her life. And she was also a founding member of the National Council for Negro Women, a member of Alpha Kappa Alpha, a member of St. Mark's Church for over 70 years. And if there's ever anybody who influenced a lot of women, it was Hortense Ridley Tate. One of her sayings, or one of her mottos, was, "Tomorrow will take care of itself because of what we've done today. I want the world to be better, and I want to have a part in making it so." So I just think that really sort of sums up what, personally, I would hope that that's my role as well. So I'm going to pause for just a second before I move on to any of the other women. And I just want to know if anybody had any questions about any of either the Y or Hortense or Alice.
Doesn't seem to be. I think you can.
Okay, so let me continue then. The next woman I want to talk about is Emily Blackwell. Has anybody heard of Elizabeth Blackwell? Okay, Elizabeth Blackwell was the first female physician in the country, in the United States. Emily was her sister, and she was number 3. Now, the family came over from Scotland when Emily was about, I would say 6 years old. Her father had a sugar refinery business there, and there was a financial downturn, and it completely destroyed his business. And so they moved to New York in order to sort of reinvent themselves. While they're in New York, they become really involved in abolition and reform movements. And he starts up another sugar refinery, which unfortunately within about 4 years burns. And now they're stuck again with nothing. So they move out to Cincinnati this time to try and get another fresh start. And unfortunately, within about 3 or 4 years, her father dies of malaria. So now they're stuck with, okay, everybody in the family, and it's the Blackwell family in and of itself is a lecture, but they all start getting jobs of some sort, and Emily becomes a teacher. Elizabeth goes off to med school, Emily becomes a teacher. And after a couple of years, Emily goes, yeah, this is not for me. I'm not cut out for teaching. I want to follow in my sister's footsteps and become a doctor as well. So she goes to Rush Medical University, or Rush Medical College, and they actually let her in. And she does a year there, only to discover that after a year, the Chicago Medical Society basically says, honey, no, not working for us. We don't want female physicians, not working for our patients. They don't want female doctors. You're out. So she doesn't take no for an answer. She goes to Western University, which is now today Case Western. And she goes there and completes her education, which, funny, it was a 2-year education. Can you imagine going to med school for 2 years now and getting becoming a doctor? No. So she gets her degree, and then goes off to Scotland to study obstetrics and gynecology. She comes, and also to try and line up some funders, because she and her sister and another woman who has a very long, convoluted last name, but they all called her Dr. Zach. So that's what I'm going to call her. So Elizabeth and Dr. Zach want to start up a college, or start up a hospital in New York City. She comes back. We're now about 1857. And they do. They start up the New York, I'm going to read this because I'll get it right, the New York Infirmary for Indigent Women and Children. And it becomes the first hospital in the United States to be the only one that caters to women and the only one with an all-female medical staff, which is pretty cool. So they continue this for a while. Civil War interrupts. Then in time, war is ended and they decide that they're going to open a women's college for medicine so that other women can get trained as well and don't have to face the hurdles that they did. That opened in 1868 and continued to run through 1899. Now, Emily, and this is why I think I'm on Team Emily versus Team Elizabeth. Emily stuck it out. Elizabeth went back to England, but Emily continued to run that infirmary and the medical college, making it the first one of the first four-year colleges, by the way. And she did that through till she was in her 70s in 1899. And by then, Cornell University and Johns Hopkins were both allowing female physician or female students to come in for medical training. And so she figured that the need for women's college was no longer there. She made sure all of her students were at Columbia or Cornell University. And once they were safely ensconced in med school there, she closed down the school. The university, however, continued, or the infirmary continued, and ultimately became part of NYU Downtown and is now part of NYU Presbyterian. So even today, it continues. So that's kind of another interesting woman helping woman. One of the women that she got into Cornell, or that went and graduated from Cornell, one of the earliest classes was Stella Bradford, another Montclair woman. And Stella did some amazing things with infectious diseases, including, and the reason I bring her up right now, she opened up an open air school. Basically, it was school in a tent that when TB was raging, it became a safe place for the kids to learn. So she did that. And once TB was under control, she then really got involved in physical therapy and started up the program at Mountainside Hospital. Just a couple of the women that I really find interesting, but all of the women who are listed behind me have got some claim to fame, and I'm happy to chat about any of them or answer any questions anybody might have. They're just, I think, you know, when you look back at these people, you say, yeah, those are the kind of footsteps I'd like to follow, or at least I do. So thank you, guys.
Thank you. That was great. Things very inspirational, and things just fascinating about how far things have come. Thank goodness. And also like the the open air places for kids to learn just sounds so today.
Right.
So yep. That's funny. Anyway, thank you. That was great, Jane. And now I'd like to introduce Holly Koplansky, president of Nujabo, to introduce our next speaker.
There we go. Good. Thank you very much, Nita. That was great, Jane. I really enjoyed it. And I'm going to have to check out some of those videos. So I'm Holly Koplansky. I'm the president of Nujabo. And I'm actually a past president and on the board of the North Essex Chamber. So I'm a busy girl. I want to thank Nina and Donna Thompson for putting this program together. I love the fact that we're collaborating with the two different organizations. Just a word about Nujabo, if I may. Nujabo is the New Jersey Association of Women Business Owners, and it's the longest standing statewide organization for women business owners in New Jersey. And our objective is to support and encourage business ownership by women by providing collaboration, education, leadership, professional development, and mentoring. The special purpose of Nujabo, which is women supporting women, is what makes us a unique and exceptional business community. And now it's my pleasure to introduce someone I've known for a very long time, whom I admire and respect, and I'm proud to call my friend, Dr. Tendai Ndoro. Dr. Ndoro has a PhD in public administration and is currently the regional director for the NJAWBO at Rutgers Newark Rutgers Business School. Dr. Ndoro has received numerous awards for her work as an economic development expert and businesswoman, which include the 2014 ASBDC National State Start Award, 2013 Top Women in Power Impacting Diversity, the 2012 NJ Garden State Women of the Year Global Impact Award, and the Minority Enterprise Advocates, 50 Women of Power in Business. In 2011, she received the WEN Business Award for promoting women. In 2010, she received the U.S. Commercial Services International Trade Award for promoting international trade in the city of Newark. And Dr. Ndoro is a trained Baldrige examiner. So it's truly my pleasure to introduce Tendai Ndoro.
Thank you, Holly, for that generous introduction. And yes, I love our friendship. I've learned a lot from you and I've gotten so much support. And thank you for inviting me, Nina and Dana. And it's always a pleasure when I'm talking to other women and I have to share my thoughts or opinions. And because this is a passion for my work in my private consulting company. I have 3 global businesses. One is a hospitality business. One is a fashion business I started in college to pay my tuition. And the oldest one is the consulting business that I train women and work with women, but I also do management consulting for nonprofit and governments, and because I'm in public administration. And as I was thinking of what I was going to talk about in a historical perspective, one of the things that I'm preoccupied with, I guess, the older I get, was the narrative that women, we are told, or we are, that are out there generally socially. And I kind of crafted my speak around, making a paradigm shift from empowerment to empowerment. And then I looked at all the movements that women have done to see how can we then bring it here and move forward into the future with this whole globalization, because I've been a person who always work on a global level. I'm originally from Zimbabwe, which is in Southern Africa. And that's why I always set my businesses in a global perspective. And I was assuming that most of the audience of women that I was going to be talking to are women in business. So I kind of looked at 4 major movements. We have the women's suffrage, where women were just fighting to vote. And then we move on to the feminist movement, where women were just fighting to go to work. And then we have the women's empowerment movement. And when I was kind of reviewing, what I've historically, these other movements, I realized that, and then we, of course, the recent one, Me Too movement. And the women's empowerment is the one that actually went global, because it was taken on. The UN, UNIFEM, and other organizations kind of embraced it. But the other 3 have been predominantly, yes, a little bit in Europe, but the other 3 have been very Americentric, and they are movements that we are familiar with in our history. But then when I was thinking about how can we as women in business make a transition, I started kind of reviewing, moving from women's empowerment to what I now call women's empowerment. And I came up with that terminology, empowerment, in 2018 when I was running for political office in Zimbabwe as a parliament. We've got a parliament system, and as it's equivalent to, I would say, Congress, running for Congress in the United States. And I realized that with all these other movements, the empowerment narrative is the one that has been very global, that have been dominant, that has in some way made some strive for women, and promoting gender equality, so that in the workplace. But the other thing that I kind of also noticed with the empowerment movement of women was it really addressed women in the workforce. And I started kind of thinking about, okay, promoting gender equality, promoting equal opportunity and inclusion and non-discrimination, promoting health, safety, work environment, and violence, free from violence, against women, and helping women have access, professional development in the workplace. But then I was thinking, I have been a business owner, I've been an entrepreneur for many years. And when I read some of these recommendations, some of these narratives, first thing that came to mind was, okay, it's workplace based. It's a narrative for workplace, women in the workplace. When you work alone or when you're a businesswoman, either you are the owner of the organization, and yes, you might have to put in these policies, but you yourself working in your own business, you are out there in a men's world. And I remember I was raised by very, what I consider feminist alpha males. And my father always used to say, always remember, it's a men's world. And my grandfather always used to say to me, only through education can a girl child open the options of her universe. And that was a mantra with my grandfather: education, education, education. Education is husband number one, a man is husband number two. And when I think of that perspective, they were always trying to protect us so that we can be self-sufficient women. And they were entrepreneurs. And so I became an entrepreneur. But I also have worked in the workplace. And then I started thinking, what does empowerment or empowerment? Because in the Zimbabwean context, if I take that as an example, or even in other places where I travel to do business, in India, in China, women still have, despite all these narratives, despite all these movements, women still have a place that they're supposed to be. And even when you look at the international organization, it's always women and children. So we are still categorized with the children. And so these are the little narratives that I look at, that I question. And I realized that the whole movement was us asking for, and we can have a discussion about it, but it was always asking or somebody else to either let us in, somebody else to put policies. They were revolutionary, but we were asking for not just permission, but we were asking to be part of this world that in the beginning had narratives and had cultural rules and norms that were meant to keep us at a certain place. Okay, so if we are constantly having to ask, when are we gonna take? And I started asking that, when are we gonna take? And if I'm always looking for a place and waiting for permission to be put in a place where I am going to be told this is where you're supposed to be. When am I going to choose my own place that I feel I should be in? And that became very clear when I was running for political office, because I was dealing with a very traditional, conservative community of men. And as I was thinking, and I started doing my campaign, and I was being told, oh, you are already too late. You should let this man run. And I was an independent, so I'm not affiliated with any political parties, and it's deliberate. I'm always an independent in the United States and in Zimbabwe, because of the patriarchal community of political parties, where it's male hierarchy, and women do the functional work, but the men usually are the ones in power and making decisions. And also, even in my business, I started thinking, I need to start teaching women leadership. And even when I go overseas and I'm teaching women in top management and in other hierarchy, in politics, and women in business, about you need to learn to get to the table. Because if you're not on the table where all the decisions are being made, how are you gonna get there? Oh, but they won't let me. Or there's always this connotation of seeming to us to expect either to be invited or to ask for permission. That we have been socialized in our upbringing, in our society. And to tell you the honest truth, I find that it's everywhere. It's just that certain societies have a better way of masking how women are treated, because there've been, like in the United States, there've been policies where it's against the law, or it's you are not allowed to do, you need to be politically correct. But in these societies like Zimbabwe, like China, like Asia, where they're still very patriarchal and where they still exercise the authority, women still feel that they need to be invited. So I kept on hearing this message, well, you should step down, you're already too late, somebody else is. And I was struggling. And then the other thing I found is there were no women I could talk to, I could bring together and say, you know, vote for me, I'm campaigning, this is my message. And I find that there are similarities here. We are kind of like isolated. Our movement have always been based on organization, on numbers. But what is it that if you are trying to access or get into an environment that is, or in an industry, because I've had a lot of women business owners who are in male-dominated industries like consulting, like defense, coming to me, and they're having issues in their boardrooms, yet they're the CEO of the company, but they've hired other people, they've hired men. And the other thing that the narrative of the women's movement put out there was this idea of a zero-sum game. If you get this seat, the man loses. So it's like, if I gain, if I sit somewhere, if I get access to something, I'm taking it away from somebody else. And even, you know what, even as women among ourselves, if a woman gets in here, age discrimination, if a woman gets here, or then another woman has to lose, this whole affirmative action mentality. And we are so unconscious about the narrative and how this empowerment kind of shapes how we calibrate our behaviors in politics, how we calibrate our behavior in business. And I just started trying to compare what I see with different women, how women will literally position themselves for a lesser role or for a lesser position. They're just glad they are promoted to director, but we know there's this whole conversation now raging about minimum wage, and and we were fighting the whole issue about equal pay, equal salary. We are still fighting. And my narrative, as I was learning from getting involved in politics and now bringing those observations here to try and see, there's what I have experienced myself in my job, but even when I'm negotiating with suppliers who happen to be men, or if I'm trying to negotiate a contract with an international organization, I realize that there is still that unsaid rule of you should know your place. You should know where you belong. And in the boardroom, you get in, and if you are expressing your thought, or you're very aggressive about it or assertive about it, you know, it's kind of frowned upon, and it's something that we have to think in our own individual way. As women business owners, we are bosses. We are responsible for other families if we hire people. We are responsible for making decisions about our businesses and about our livelihood, and even maybe livelihoods of our family. We are responsible for negotiating our own skills. We are responsible for negotiating our own contracts. So what is clear among us as women is we have the capacity and we have the capability. That we agree on. But the empowerment narrative kind of seemed to, I don't want to say hinder us. We have to start thinking it has to be a revolution within the woman as an individual to say, I am going to be empowered. My power comes from within, and be comfortable in that uncomfortable space. And so I was thinking, as we move forward, we have gone into a situation and where it's global now, and we want to grow our businesses. I have, because of the nature of my businesses, have to deal in other societies. I have to negotiate contracts with global organizations. I have to deal with suppliers. And I remember one time when one of my suppliers, my manufacturer in India, I went and they made a mistake on my order. And something had told me, you know what, instead of waiting for it to land here and see it when it gets to your warehouse, why don't you go to India and see the order before it ships and inspect the order before it ships? And I went. And it was just as simple. And of course, you know, they were trying to convince me that no, the order was correct according to the specification of the sample that they had sent me. And thank God I had carried the sample with me. So we get into their boardroom, they bring the finished order for me to inspect, and I'm like, no, this is not it. And this is what's wrong with it. And they were adamant, no, the order is correct. And the owner of the manufacturing company was there, but he had sent his second, I'll say his right-hand man, to negotiate with me, because now I was negotiating a discount on the order, because 25% discount. But you know, when you are negotiating, you always ask for 35%, but you really want to get to 25%, right? So these are some of the unwritten rules of being in business and negotiating certain positions. And he was like, no. So he eventually went to call the owner of the business to say, okay, you know what, she's not cooperating with us. And India is still very much an empowered community for women. I mean, women are in business, they're aggressive, but there's still that narrative, that understanding that there is a place, with this place in this universe of the sexes, right? But I had deliberately, knowing that I was in that environment, I had walked in the board meeting and I had sat in his chair. And I had deliberately done that because I was outnumbered. I had my agent and me, we are both women, and she's an Indian woman. And I had the company and their team, their management team, negotiating with me. So when I walked into the boardroom, I deliberately sat in his chair. And what that action did was I assumed his power, you know, psychologically, visually, etc. So when he came and he now wanted to kind of like shut me down or at least negotiate, he's the owner of the company, and it's a big company. They do big contracts here in the United States. He walked in and he saw me sitting at the head of the table in his seat. He kind of kind of pivoted a little bit, like not sure whether to continue into the room and sit somewhere else, because wherever he was going to sit, it was going to make him weaker than me. And what he did is he just made a round turn and went to his office, called his manager, and he never came to the room again, because he understood what had happened here. And when the manager came, we concluded, I got my 25%. And one of the things that, having been, and that was the end of that story. And one of the things that I have learned in business, and I think the objective of my presentation is, are we self-watching? Are we seeing when we take power and it allows us to move ahead? It doesn't matter, you don't have to be doing business globally, but when you are here and you are doing business, are you begging for business, or are you taking the business? Because we have to start really thinking, because if we are in business and we want to leave a legacy for our daughters, the nuances of our behavior and the nuances of our actions transfer. Whether you teach them or not, they see how you navigate your power as a woman in business, as a woman in the community, as a woman in church, as a woman in every aspect. So if we are going to think forward, we have to think forward with this empowerment narrative. It doesn't mean you have to be antagonistic with the opposite sex. And that's not what I'm insinuating. What I'm saying is you have to understand how you navigate in your world, in your business, in your politics, in your relationship, in a position that doesn't erode who you are, or because it means that all the shoulders of all these movements that we've been standing, that we have benefited from, and even the empowerment movement took us somewhere, will be for nothing, because our daughters and our great-granddaughters will still be fighting the same fight. And we look at it and we think to ourselves, the Me Too movement, there are all these laws and policies that have been put out there about sexual harassment, yet they are still going on. It's still going on to this day. And I think we cannot leave our men behind. I think the other thing that I always think as women is, we need to have that conversation. I usually have that conversation. I mean, when my grandfather and my father was alive, I had that conversations with the men in my family. But now I have that conversation with my brothers and say to them, what you said, you're undermining me. If you say this to somebody else, and usually they're undermining me either in the family or in with their girlfriends or their wives, and and I'm like, well, when you do this, you're undermining me. Yet when you want my counsel and my advice, you come to me and I have to be the neutral party. So let's take off the narrative that I'm your sister. And let me just explain to you as a woman how, not so much how it makes me feel, but how I perceive your move in behaving this way. And we can do it with our spouses as well. We can do it with our sons. If you see your son behaving in a certain way to your daughter, or even to another female in your household, it's a conversation. Or if you see an employee, a male employee, doing it to a female employee. So as women business owners, we have a responsibility to change the narratives to a narrative that we know can actually move us forward. And my narrative, as I have gotten older, as I have had a girl child, as I have navigated business in a predominantly male environment, I have realized that, I gain confidence in who I am but more importantly, I get more done. And it's a win-win situation, not a zero-sum gain or a win-lose situation or a lose-lose situation. So I think our movement as we move forward has to be the revolution of the mind in terms of who I am as a woman. How can I, as a woman in business, as a woman in the home, because I think sometimes there's this narrative also, or this impression, permeating impression that women who are housewives are less, or they are unaccomplished, or they do less work. And I know we have had this conversation, but they are empowered in their role because they are making a lot of decisions. They are managing. And if a woman knows how to manage a household, trust me, they know how to manage a business. They know how to manage an office, because those skills are transferable. But sometimes as women, we don't give us the permission to be confident in the skill set that we have acquired over the years, in whatever role, in whatever situation, and in whatever position that we have set in. So if we are to think about where do I want, and I always want to say when I do conversations with women, we are very cooperative in nature, but the empowerment model, the empowerment approach is very individualistic, because only you can go in, you can dig deeper, you can then know where your power or lack thereof lies, because it's a very personal experience. But
that might be a good part,
that allows us to
thank you. You gave us a lot to think about. So we just wanted to maybe get some discussion going or questions. Does anybody have any questions for Tendai? You can feel free to unmute your mics. I just found that, we heard about historically some very empowered women, and Tendai told her story, but it all gets back to us individually and having that mindset to empower ourselves and do that through our business, et cetera, et cetera. And I was just wondering if anybody had any thoughts from their experience of, where they've changed course, or how they've operated their business, that could give us another example of empowerment, as Tendai was talking about.
I think that, I loved your talk, Tendai. I think in my own mind, I don't see male versus female. I try, when I go into a room, I'm an equal. And if you don't treat me as an equal, you're going to get it back the same way you give it to me. So respectfully, obviously, but I never think of myself as lesser than anyone else. And I think we have to start thinking that way for ourselves, not in an egotistical way, but in a way that says we're confident, we're secure in what we're doing, we're knowledgeable, we're educated, so our opinions matter, and our discussions should be of equal value.
Absolutely.
Definitely agree. Definitely agree.
Tendai, I love the example you give about going to the head of the table, and that was amazing.
Great.
I don't know where you got the courage to do that, but I had a staff of mostly men, and I would be sitting in my desk, and they would come in with their whatever problem, and they'd be standing there, and I'd be sitting. And another tip sort of like that is they would be leaning over me, and in order to take some control, I would stand up, and they would literally take 2 steps back, and then we were eye to eye. So the body language, the positioning, where you position yourself in the room, these are such important things that go unnoticed sometimes. So thank you for that tip. That was amazing.
That's great.
Plus our stature, I'm a small person, so you have to stand big, even though your height might be small. You have to own, you know.
Yeah, Brene Brown does a great talk about that, about taking control, standing tall, standing up, superwoman stance.
Cool. Well, that could be a follow-up.
I just want to say thank you, Jane, for giving your presentation. I'm not big on history, but that was very inspiring. And for a doctor, oh my gosh, I'm going to a meeting later and I'm like, I'm getting that contract. You were so inspiring. It was great. Thank you.
You're welcome.
That's excellent. Anybody else have any thoughts?
I'll just say this morning I was listening to NPR and they were speaking about women farmers and how they're struggling to organize themselves in they're doing the work, they're farmers, but they don't get the respect, they don't get any of the government supports that are out there for for their businesses, and they're working really hard to do that. So it sort of fit in so well. I listened to that this morning and then I heard you speak, and all over the world women are still fighting for that recognition and ability to function. I mean, it's not just recognizing them, but there are support systems around in business and government that are there for the taking if you know about them and you're able to get them, to get your hands on them, to empower. And I'll just say one other thing, that I was working with a Bedouin father, and he had 15 children. And when his daughter said she wanted to be a teacher, he said, I'm not sending you to school. He said, I want you to be a chemist, a pharmacist. I want education is the way for our women to stop having 15 children. And if they get educated, they will also educate their men, and then everybody will be in a better situation. So it was very interesting to hear this coming from a father that said it's the education of the children, and especially the girls, their daughters, to take a higher standing place in society. Mm-hmm. And not be married off when they're 12 years old. And it was a conversation that encompassed so much, but it was the father who felt very strongly about that, and I respected him very much.
And while not the same extreme, that was really sort of the theory behind stressing the value of education with the YWCA. So it all ties together. That same education is really key.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Absolutely.
Right. And then you have to educate the women who are educated, have to educate the men because it doesn't come the other way usually.
Not usually. Great. All right. Anything else anyone would like to share? All right. Well, we're at the top of the hour.
Well, thank you so much. This is wonderful.
I'd like to thank our speakers, Dr. Tendai and Jane. Great to see you again. Thank you both for your presentations this morning. They were great. I'd just like to put in a plug for the chamber. Our next event is our transitional Tuesday in a week and a half. Please check our calendar for that. It's sort of our lunch and learn type of event. And I appreciate everybody being here, and have a great weekend.
Thank you.
You too. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you, everybody.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Stay safe, stay well.